Hello, and welcome to Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things. This is your co-host, Sam Marvin. I'm here with my other co-host, Sean. Sean, how you doing?
Good. This is episode 20, Samuel.
It's a big milestone.
It is, and we took a couple of weeks off there, so it's not 20 weeks straight that we've been doing this, but 20 Sundays of recording and getting a new episode out there. That's pretty good for us, for just a hobby.
It is. You know, we are lucky that pop culture continues to provide material to which we can react. We'll get to some of that new material in a second. But first, if you are a first-time listener, please subscribe to this podcast. Like us on Facebook. We have a Facebook page, Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things. Go there for additional updates, engagement with us, previews of upcoming episodes. We also have a subscription system. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to this podcast, various levels at which you can subscribe. That is all available through our Buzzsprout page, which is linked on our YouTube, and it is available through whatever podcasting app you are using to listen to us. And then I did mention YouTube. We are on YouTube now. Video uploads of these podcasts are live. We are going to continue to experiment with that content in the future, but those are our big developments with the pod. Sean, over to you.
Yeah, and one more thing on the YouTube. Every video or every episode that we've posted is now on YouTube, so I am all caught up with moving stuff over there, and I will be releasing the new episodes as they're scheduled to go out on Wednesdays moving forward. Speaking of Facebook, we posted a link to our Facebook page a couple days ago about a new deal that was announced. If you're a fan of Critical Role and Amazon Prime's Legend of Vox Machina, get ready for even more Critical Role content. An announcement was just made that Amazon Prime is at least picking up the Mighty Nine, which is the second campaign of the Critical Role group. So in the near future, we can expect to see the likes of Not the Brave, Caleb Widogast, and many other characters making their way to Amazon Prime. And movie rights, Sam. If they decide that they want to make a movie, Amazon Prime's got first go at that material as well. So just a whole bunch of good news. If you are a fan of D&D content, Critical Role, any of that, we're about to get a whole lot more of it.
I'll say
in coming years.
One thing that we have not seen, at least I have not seen this yet, are subscriber watcher numbers, viewer numbers for the Amazon Prime series, both season one and the first, I guess probably the first half of this season is now out. I would imagine that the numbers are good enough that Amazon is going in with the success of the Twitch stream. I think that speaks for itself. The success of the Kickstarter, that speaks for itself as well. But now they've got a solid season and a half that have been out, and I'm hopeful that we can continue this trend and get more Critical Role content. Obviously, people love the stories. We're talking about it. We hope that you all are watching and following along, and that we can continue to do this.
That leads us to what we're here for today in episode 20. We're covering the next 3 episodes that dropped this last Friday. The episode titles that we will be talking about today are episode 4, Those Who Walk Away, episode 5, Pass Through Fire, and episode 6, Into Rhyme Cleft. Now, if you, for some reason, are listening to this episode without having watched anything of the Critical Role season 1 or the first 3 episodes, or you don't know anything about the Critical Role campaigns and you want to watch the live stream before you get any content about this animated series, heavy spoiler warning. We will be talking about things that happened during the live stream. We'll be talking about things that happened in season 1 and in the first 3 episodes. And we break it down pretty nitty-gritty. So if you want to catch any of that, please pause, go back and watch the show, and then pick us up when you are ready to. But otherwise, Sam, you want to start us off with a recap for episode 4?
I would love to. Episode begins in a flashback. A young Vex and Vax are moving their way through a camp of hunters or poachers. Vax was rescuing Vex, who had been taken captive. They come across a large wounded bear. They put it out of its misery and then discover a cub. This cub is adopted by Vex and becomes Trinket. We then flash back or flash forward to where the prior episode left off, which was a dead Vax lying in the temple of the Matron of Ravens, as the party was questing for one of the first vestiges of divergence. The character Cash, who is a priest cleric that accompanied them for a portion of this quest, returns along with Zara. Cash attempts to resurrect Vex, but at first is unsuccessful. Excuse me, I knew this was going to happen. Vex is dead. Cash tries to resurrect Vex. Vax is watching, and he sees the Matron of Ravens, this god of death, god of the transition between life and death, interfere with the resurrection. And in his frustration over seeing his sister die and the resurrection fail, Vax pleads to take him instead. The Matron of Ravens seemingly accepts this bargain, and then Vex is returned to life, and Vax all of a sudden is wearing the vestige of divergence. It was this suit of armor. Zara and Cash they have a side conversation about how they still want to get the vestige back, and they're implied they're going to figure out a way to do so. As they are moving through the temple, Vax starts to have visions of what we learn to be the past, this calamity, a battle between the gods and the mortal inhabitants of this world. During a key point in the party's traversing of the sunken temple, Zara summons a large tentacled monster. It has one eye floating off the ground. We'll talk about what it could be in a second. Its tentacles are shooting out and turn the party members into stone. It petrifies them. Vax, during this encounter, has additional visions in which he is fighting a character who he calls Pervon Sewell, the former champion of the Matron of Ravens. It allows himself to be defeated in a duel that's taking place in this vision. As he allows himself to be defeated, the armor that he wore, the vestige, activates and gives him the ability to move very quickly, to blink back and forth, and using his newfound powers, he defeats this monster. The rest of the party is returned to flesh with the help of Cash. The whole group, Vox Machina and these two others who are with them, escape the tomb, the sunken temple, as it begins to flood. We have a series of apologies here. First, Percy apologizes to Vax for getting Vex killed. Vax punches him. Zara and Cash apologize for their underhandedness, and Zara gives Vex a locket into which she can put a creature. Earlier in the episode, we saw Zara summon the eye monster out of the locket, and then Vex uses it to temporarily put Trinket into this pocket plane and then pull him back out again. Vax continues to have these visions of people dying and the Matron of Ravens, and we even have a kind of a jump scare vision of a seemingly zombie version of Vax. It is implied that we'll talk about the tethering in a second. The episode ends with the view of the party fading into a palantir or a crystal ball, and we see Ripley, who is looking at the party through this crystal ball, walking toward the ruined, burning city of Westron with a large dragon flying in the background. And that's the end of episode 4. Sean, what did you think?
So far, I am really beginning to think that there's so much that I don't remember from the live stream, that when I'm watching these episodes, there's a lot of stuff that I'm forgetting. So it's kind of like I'm watching them for the first time. And I know there's differences as well between the live stream and this animated show. But yeah, I really feel like I'm getting new things every time that I'm watching these episodes, and it's a good feeling.
I think some of that for me comes from the fact that the live stream is largely improv. I mean, most of what people are saying is improv. A lot of the way that the encounters develop is improv. Matt Mercer, the dungeon master, to a certain extent, puts things in front of he has an idea of where he wants to go. But I remember in an interview, he said, I didn't even know which one of the party members was going to put on the armor, was going to wear the vestige. There were several people who could have. It just happened to be Vax, and they didn't know that Vex was going to die in that encounter with the trap, and that set off the whole chain of events of Vex donning the armor and pleading for the Matron of Ravens to kind of spare her life in exchange for his. So the writing process really allows them to refine these things and kind of smooth out any sort of rough edges. So I agree with you. There are a lot of times I'm like, I don't remember if it happened like that, but I like how it happened. And I think the less you go into the episode expecting to see everything on the live stream animated, the more you're going to enjoy it. And then where it does connect back to something that you remember, it's that much more enjoyable, but it still stands on its own very well.
Yeah. And over these 3 episodes, I've realized they're really condensing stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So just showing up at Pyra, everything that happens at Pyra is 1 episode in this, or even like less than an episode because it takes them 10 minutes to get there in the first place. But yeah, there's a lot of condensing, which is good because there's so much material you need to cover. But it's interesting to see how they're condensing it, because that will let us know like the importance of other things that are going to come up later. But just leads me to a very cool moment with Cash when he begins to try to resurrect Vex. He says something along the lines of, we got to do it while the body's warm, which is that idea that some resurrection spells, you have like 60 seconds to cast it. Otherwise it's too late. So clearly that's what they're referring to, a D&D rule concept in this.
Yeah. And they definitely they didn't call it, I don't think they called it resurrection in the show. I think they called it a revival ritual, which is exactly what you're talking about. The difference between revivify, which you do to a warm yet deceased body, a newly passed individual, versus resurrection, which you can do when that person has been dead for a while. Spoiler alert, resurrection will happen it happened in the live stream in the future as the party gets more powerful and also encounters more powerful enemies. But yeah, this was I'm pretty sure a revivify.
And we also get a very cool imagery or picture of them saying the spell isn't working because we're in the domain of the Matron of Ravens. So like the interactions between, I can't remember what god Cash serves, but at least the Everlight with Pike, because they're in a temple of the Matron of Ravens, like they don't have as much power because of where they are. And then it just shows the matron so easily breaking the spell with her finger as they're trying to cast it. Yeah, just very cool imagery and showing that like balance between the gods. And you might be in in a situation where you can't communicate with your gods as effectively. And what happens to your power? You're basically useless if you're a cleric and don't have the power of your gods with you. So it was cool seeing that in the show. So there's so many like different D&D rules and concepts that they're covering that as a normal viewer or someone who doesn't play D&D, they find ways to make it make sense to the average viewer. But if you're someone who plays D&D, you look at it and go, oh, there's so many different like rules and intricacies that they're paying an homage to. So it's great.
You could imagine that the exchange between Cash and Pike and the rest of the party standing there was them kind of failing a skill check or something like that, right? The DC is higher because you're in a temple to a different god, or you have disadvantage on the roll, and they rolled poorly, and that's why the resurrection or the revivify failed. I similarly had a note, just the animation in that whole scene of him drawing out the runes and kind of the glowing and the fading was great. And and the finger of the matron of Ravens poking through that little shell. Egg. Yeah, it was fantastic.
It's like an egg of power that was around Vex at the moment.
So something that stood out to me early in the episode during the flashback scene was a line that Vex says to Vax while they are escaping from the poacher encampment. And she says, "Embrace what's in front of you, don't fight it." And I think that really sets up the embracing of being the champion of the Raven Queen, or the Matron of Ravens, rather, that Vax has, and some of the additional choices that he will make going forward. And then, do you remember the idea of Vax being fate touched?
I remember it being spoken and introduced, but I don't remember how it came about.
Okay. I think it was either a background or a feat that he took. It's how he got the lucky feat where he could re-roll certain things. So in the live stream, there is this idea of Vax being fate touched, and his character's kind of he's torn between staying with his sister and being with the people that he loves, but then also these more cosmic roles, almost stepping into the shoes of the champion of the Matron of Ravens. And I thought that was really interesting when you I think you described it as the tether moves from between the twins to between Vax and the Matron of Ravens. And I thought that was a really interesting way to kind of demonstrate the embracing what's in front of you, and this idea of being now tethered to a god, and not a god that you can know that much about. It's not like the other gods that we've seen. It's she's silent, she's over death, so there's this kind of strange aspect to it.
And just to visualize it for our listeners, if you've seen the episode, when Vex is being kind of lifted up during that revival spell, and Vax says, "Take me instead," the matron uses her like sharp finger and kind of severs a gold link in between the twins. And then the next time we see Vax have a vision, he is tethered to the Matron of Ravens instead. So clearly his fate with Vex is not, they're not tied together anymore. And his fate is now tied to the Matron. So it's a very cool idea or concept. It made me think a lot about Hercules, the animated Hercules, with the hairs. Do you remember that?
I have to admit, I've never seen the animated Hercules movie.
Are you fucking kidding me?
I'm sorry, but we're talking about the weaving of fate.
So in Hercules, your soul, your life is represented by this string, and then the three witches of fate. When you die, they can clip it, and then you die. So it reminded me of that. But the moment that Hercules becomes a god, it turns like this very shiny gold, and they can't cut it. So it was just something that it made me think of it. Our listeners might be able to connect with me on that. You clearly can't. So we're just going to move on.
Maybe I'll watch it and comment on it. But I'm familiar with the idea of the kind of the threads of fate. And it also initially reminded me of the idea in D&D of the silver thread that connects people who are moving through the astral plane, which I think is kind of de-emphasized in 5th edition D&D, but was there in 3rd edition, and I think was probably introduced prior to that in earlier editions. But yeah, the idea of this kind of new connection came through very strong. Did you have any other comments on this one? I think there's a few more kind of stray observations that we can get to.
Yeah, I just want to say the design of the Matron of Ravens is great because she's creepy. And when you watch the video or the imagery of her, she's kind of always hunched over. She has the porcelain mask. They make her hands kind of claw-like and inhuman. And the concept behind the Matron of Ravens is that she once was a human, and she found a way to become a god. And she basically dethrones the original god of death and takes the position for herself. So if you don't know the backstory of the Matron of Ravens, that's her brief, in a nutshell, backstory. So she's not your normal or typical prime deity. And because she's the goddess of death, she's not really one that's kind of sought after or served very much. So that's why when we see this, the interaction between Vax and the visions he's having, there's a lot of like horror scenes where he turns around and he sees like a zombie decayed version of himself. He's there as a man is dying and his wife is comforting him. He sees the matron take his soul. So there's a bunch of different visualizations that they give you where this might not be a very comforting role or position to be in for Vax in the moment. And it sets up a pretty good arc for Vax in the coming seasons. Who knows how many more we're going to have, but just where this experience is going to take him. I mean, he basically sells his soul to save his sisters. So we'll see what happens and where they go with that.
And it's kind of, and maybe this is something that they will deal with, that the idea of a god of death is, it sounds evil at first, but then you have to recall that death is a natural part of life. And in this universe, there are things such as undeath, which are viewed as abominations. And so the actual transition from life through death to kind of a gentle repose, to grab a term from D&D, is an important one. And so while the god is obviously not necessarily welcome, this isn't somebody that you would want to see, it's better than the alternative, which would be to wander the world as a ghost or return as some sort of abomination. So maybe that's something that they'll talk about, but it's also a little bit more, you have to, I always want to remind myself that these characters are supposed to be relatively young, right? I think we even get Vex talking about how she's matured now that she has died and come back. So that might be something that they also learn to kind of cope with, is this deity that Vax is now serving.
Yeah, and seeing the Matron of Ravens and the whole idea of death, a really good depiction of death. Have you seen The Sandman yet on Netflix?
No.
It's another show that everybody should watch, and I hope we eventually cover it because it's a great show based off of Neil Gaiman's work. But they have a depiction of death. So the Sandman his real name is Dream, and his sister is Death. And there's an episode where he kind of follows her while she's doing her job, which is being with people at the end of their life. And it's going back to like the origins of humanity, death is like the most scary thing that humans deal with, and the unknown of everything. So the whole concept in Sandman is that Death is this very friendly looking woman, and her whole job basically that she tells Dream is to just be a friendly face at the end and provide comfort and to make sure that it's not a scary experience. And Dream kind of asks her, like, how can you do this every day? Because it's such like a depressing job. And she goes, no, just being a friendly face when someone needs it. That's how I view my job. So it's cool to see that representation. And then to see the Matron of Ravens, who is kind of doing the exact same thing, even though we haven't really gotten it yet in these 3 episodes, because Vax is still kind of dealing with the trauma of everything that happened and hasn't really embraced the Matron of Ravens yet. And I hope that we get that more with more interactions between him and the Matron, that she does, as we know in the live stream, she does kind of take on that role of just being there for the transition. And that's kind of her job. So no, I'm excited. And it really, like I said, just made me think of Sandman as well. So that's just my little 2 cents that I wanted to add.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's an interesting theme, right?
Yeah.
That will.
What else do you have for episode 4?
So just a couple of random observations, really talking about the adaptation of the live stream game. So in this episode, there was no kiss between Cash and Keyleth. And that was something that had been in the live stream, I think, at a point even earlier in this story, that the character Cash, this cleric voiced by Will Friedle, kissed Keyleth kind of as a surprise, uninvited kiss. And he later apologized for it, in character apologized for it, but they just kind of cut that out completely, which I like. Just, I think he was trying to have like a moment in the D&D game that maybe didn't come off as well in retrospect. So that we don't have any of that. And then in the live stream, I do remember the suit of armor came with a necklace that is the exact same thing as Zara's trinket, where it'll hold onto an animal. And in the live stream, it contained a wolf that was the companion to Pervon, whose name was Galric, I think. And they just set him loose in the woods around Whitestone and asked him to kind of guard the area. So we cut that out because we don't even go to Whitestone this episode. And then my final observation was around the monster that they fight. I described it, I think, as kind of a part beholder thing. One large eye, central eye, kind of a floating orb type thing. But the thing that was different was the tentacles and how they could petrify. And so I thought this was kind of a mix between a beholder and a roper, because the tentacles could shoot out and grab people. And then in D&D, beholders are these iconic monsters, one large central eye, a bunch of different eye stalks that have all these different powers, and one of which was petrification. And I thought it was a cool monster to fight. And in the live stream episodes where they're at this temple, they do fight a just kind of standard beholder. So this is a fun kind of nod to that and a good monster to fight.
I was going to say, I read in a news article that this monster was based off of beholders.
Okay.
Because they don't have the rights to having a full out beholder in the game. This is the Critical Role Exandria version of what a beholder would be.
All right, so that's it for episode 4. Moving on to episode 5. Sean, you want to give us the recap?
Episode 5, Pass Through Fire. starts with a flashback of a young Keyleth and her parents while her mom is about to leave for the Aramente, which is a series of challenges that the leader of the Ashari needs to go through. And you might know that Keyleth, she's mentioned it before, is currently doing her Aramente. She talks about how wind, fire, earth, and water all work together. That is what her mom tells Keyleth right before she leaves. We cut back to the group. They're camped out near the tomb, and Keyleth realizes they're close to Pyra, where the Fire Ashari live. Grog has a conversation with Craven Edge about it ever getting full of blood. Vax has creepy visions of the Matron of Ravens while on watch. This is that moment where we see him being tethered to the Matron instead of Vex. We find out Vax can't take the armor off. We also find out that Scanlan's broom flies. The volcano that the Fire Ashari is supposed to be watching is erupting, meaning that the rift between the planes is open. Keyleth then says she's going to go help them, even if the rest of the group won't. And that is Vax in particular being hesitant to go. We find Keyleth's dad at Pyra trying to help close the gate to the elemental plane of fire. We see Kima and Allura are also there helping to try close the gate. We see how they survived the dragon attack in Iman. Big battle ensues with all the fire elementals coming through. Craven Edge tells Grog to kill something with blood if the fire elementals don't have it. We find out that Allura and Kima fought Thordak years ago and tied him to the plane of fire with something called a soul tether. And it was a red stone that they used to tie him in. Keyleth enters the fire plane, seemingly masters fire, becomes a fire elemental, and then closes the gate. We then cut back to Umbrasil at Westrun with a pile of gold and a guy that says his group is called the Herd. Then Anna Ripley is there and gives info to Umbrasil about Vox Machina. And that is how the episode closes out. We have Keyleth basically mastering fire. The fire elemental chief kind of gives her his blessing as like a stamp of approval that, yes, you've passed the fire portion of your test. And the group kind of has a pretty cool battle. What are the big things that you saw during this episode, Sam?
So first, the title, Pass Through Fire, takes place, or is first, that phrase is in a remark that Keyleth's mother makes to her on the eve or the right before her departure for the Aramente. That comes from a letter that the character played by Patrick Rothfuss wrote to Keyleth during the events of the dragon confrontation. Around this, I believe it was around this time, because I think that character made an appearance in their fight with the Black Dragon, which we see the first encounter with the Black Dragon during this episode span. And that's just a very cool line. I think a lot of people that watch the live stream really point to that letter as kind of being the summary of Keyleth in a lot of ways. She's this kind of timid, unsure young girl who goes through trials by fire and comes out stronger on the other side. And so we got the literal manifestation of that in this episode, but that was the first thing that jumped out to me. We also kind of get a similar trope to the beginning of the first episode where we set up these kind of points of resonance that we're going to come back to in the modern day. So, flashback to the childhood, then we come back to the modern day, and the that lesson continues. So that was kind of the first thing that jumped out to me in this episode. What about you?
Well, so my big thing was, didn't the entire group go into the fire plane with Keyleth? I thought in this one in particular, there was like a mission that they had to go do. So everybody went together. So this is another example of how they're trying to make everything concise. And
yes. I think I made reference to this in our discussion of the first 3 episodes, and how in the live stream they go to Pyra for Keyleth's Aramente before the dragon attack even happens. So they are there and see it pre-destruction. And Keyleth's Aramente trial requires them to go into the plane of fire and actually fight Kyranos, who is the kind of village headman, in the shape of a fire elemental. And they all fight him, they defeat him, and then he gives her the kind of the blessing of the fire Ashari. And then later, after the dragon attack, they come back to help the wounded, and then they need to repair the rift to the elemental plane of fire. And it's actually in that episode where we have a guest star. I can remember his character's name, but I cannot remember his name. Chris Hardwick, now disgraced Chris Hardwick, plays the character Gurn Blanston, who helps them fight off fire elementals and some salamanders. And I think they have a pretty major confrontation there.
Yes,
and actually,
we will not be getting any Gurn Blanston in this series, I don't think.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to get any Gurn Blanston. And that was actually the origin of Vex's broom, her broom of flying. She actually stole it from Gurn Blanston in the live stream. So we get kind of a consolidation of those two things where she passes her Aramente and they seal the rift created by Thordak's escape from the plane of fire in one episode instead of splitting it up over multiple and having some other things interspersed.
And we don't have Gurn Blanston and the disgraced Chad Hardwick in this episode, but we do have another guest appearance by Robbie Daymond. Now, Robbie Daymond plays a character in the third campaign at the very beginning, and he was part of one of the mini series that they just came out with right before campaign 3 started. So having Robbie come in for being the leader of the Fire Ashari was pretty cool. What else happened in this episode?
When the episode wraps, we get the leader of the Fire Ashari saying how Thordak received assistance from somebody who was posing as a member of the tribe, and then tells Keyleth to be sure who she trusts, which, for those of you who are paying attention, we discussed in our last episode with a certain refugee from the fall of Iman who made it to Whitestone. So that's something that's not going to go away. That was another thing. And then earlier in the episode, there's Grog is having a conversation with Craven Edge, the basically evil sword that is demanding blood. And this was one of my favorite all-time scenes from the live stream, where Grog is in an outhouse talking to his sword, and
this
Scanlan.
It was in Vasselheim, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it was in Vasselheim. Yeah. And it's just.
Yeah. I was going to say, yeah, it's great. And we had talked about in the first 3 episodes, the last episode of our podcast, the conversations with Craven Edge, when Matt as Craven Edge would just sigh. And we finally got the sigh in this episode, which was so great.
Yeah, you've got this sword who is smarter than the person wielding it. And the sword wants one thing, and the sword wants blood. And Grog is like simultaneously smart enough to kind of to not question or to like understand how to converse with the sword, to know what it wants, but not smart enough to think that is both a bad thing and just like wants to make it happy, but also really enjoys the strength that he gets from it. And we see that in the next episode. Yeah, but those conversations from the live stream, some people have done a really good job, I think, with some just animating those in a very rough style and putting them up on YouTube using the audio from the live stream. They're so great. And Scanlan is there thinking that Grog is talking to his poop, which is great. Anyway, so we got that. I think you mentioned this in your notes for, I think, the upcoming episode, but just the continuing excellent combination of humor and horror, or humor and drama. It really helps keep the tone balanced, and it allows us to kind of lean into some of the darker aspects because the humor is there to pull us out of it.
And thank you, Sam, for taking one of my notes for the next episode.
Well, I acknowledged it. That was your thought.
You bastard. Before we get to the next episode, I just want to say, when Keyleth turns into the elemental, she totally looks like the Fire King from Adventure Time. Is this another show that you?
Yeah.
Oh
sorry.
My God.
I'm very picky with what I
really hope that people who listen to this podcast are at least laughing or smiling with my references today, because Sam is giving me nothing, which is very sad.
I'm acknowledging them. I'll say the thing that jumped out to me was it reminded me a little bit of the Sauron from the Peter Jackson Hobbit, and then maybe the Sentinel from the first Marvel Thor movie.
Episode 6.
All right.
Into the Rhyme Cleft. You did 2 recaps last time, so I'm going to save you, and I'm going to do 2 recaps this time.
Take it away.
Into the Rhyme Cleft. Dreaming, Grog is in a gladiator arena, giving blood to the sword when he realizes he's killed his friends instead. Then a guy named Kevdak says, "You've made the herd proud." Grog is in the process of realizing that his sword is evil. Elith says Vax might want to ask the Matron of Ravens for help. They find the mountain that the other Sphinx might be in, which was revealed to Vax in one of his visions. Soon after, they find an obelisk sticking out of the ground. Vex flies up and sees a bunch more, and then spots an entrance. They go up to it and walk through an illusion door. Inside, they find the male Sphinx, who says that they need to prove themselves worthy for the information he holds. It gives them 3 options: kill 70 Death Gorgons, escape the endless labyrinth, or wound him because he has never felt pain in his entire existence. They decide to try and wound him, and he transports them to another plane. Grog realizes if he doesn't kill things for Craven Edge, it saps his strength. And in this moment, we see his right arm kind of atrophy a little bit. So the rest of him is very muscly, but then his right arm looks like mine. Everyone gets taken out by the Sphinx one by one as they're trying to wound him. All they have to do is strike him once. But Scanlan realizes there's another way when it's him by himself with the Sphinx. He emotionally damages the Sphinx by singing him a song about how the 2 Sphinxes are supposed to be separated from each other. And there's like an emotional wound. He says, "You've wounded my heart." And he begins to think that Scanlan is the most wise being in the world. We get Scanlan's emotional levels in this one, and he has a moment with the Sphinx while everybody else is kind of falling through the void. Scanlan and the Sphinx by themselves are kind of sitting there having conversations about love, and Scanlan reveals that he doesn't really love anybody, or he doesn't have love, and that's what he's trying to find. Scanlan is gifted a vestige called Myth Carver. Scanlan also gets a vision of a bow in the Fey realm and a Goliath with stone gauntlets in the ruins of Westrun. All of a sudden, Bristle attacks them, and Vox Machina fights him with the help of the Sphinx. The male Sphinx dies while trying to save Scanlan. Grog goes into a blood rage, buying time for everyone, and accidentally stabs Pike through the chest. Before Umbrasyl is able to attack them, Keyleth plane shifts them away, but Grog, Scanlan, and Pike get sent somewhere else, and it seems like the remaining group is somewhere in the Feywild. And that is where episode 6 ends. Sam, what is the biggest thing from episode 6 that you want to bring up?
The biggest thing, I like that we have Anna Ripley giving the dragons intel about what Vox Machina is doing. It heightens the stakes. It reminds us of the threat of the dragons, and it sets Anna Ripley up as a villain during the course of maybe this season, or at least this kind of arc of confronting the dragons. I don't recall if Dr. Ripley was helping the dragons or trying to, like, on her own find the vestiges, solely find the vestiges on her own. I know that in the live stream, they do conflict over these over the vestiges of divergence, but we don't get the same shots of what she is doing at these various points in time, which is to me an advantage of the animation over the live stream, where in the live stream it's really set to whatever the characters are seeing, who the characters are interacting with, and maybe if they do a scry spell. But in an animated show, you can cut away at any time and show non-party members and doing what they're doing to heighten the drama. So that's the change that I like the most, is the giving Dr. Anna Ripley more to do in the plot of these early episodes before she becomes a main villain.
Yeah. By doing that, it kind of makes the interactions later on more pivotal. Because before, it just seems like it was accidental run-ins with Ripley in the live stream. Where this, it's like she's a main foil to the group until it comes to heads later on. But honestly, for this episode, I don't really have a whole lot to add. One part that just made me laugh was Grog swaddling Scanlan, wrapping him up in like a baby carrier.
Yeah, they were moving through like a supernaturally cold environment, and so there's a moment we get some little character moments too, where I think somebody says, "Oh, this area is always cold," and we've got the kind of classic frozen snot on Scanlan's face, and then Grog swaddles him, and Percy gives Vex his overcoat, And she says, "Oh, you don't need to do this." And he goes, "Oh no, I'm fine." And then he looks super cold and his nose starts running. So we get and I think this ties into your other point about we get a little bit of humor and some lighthearted moments here. And of course, that all happens at the beginning, and then the tension kind of increases and we get more serious as we go on.
Yeah, but that's my big point, is just the show does a very good job of keeping things light while also addressing some like dark, heavy drama aspects as well. And I've heard a lot of criticism about the upcoming D&D movie, that people thought it was going to be too jokey, but I don't understand that criticism, because that's all D&D is humor mixed in with drama.
Yeah.
So if the D&D movie ends up being, if it feels like they're trying to play to the jokes too much, that's what D&D is. Critical Role is known as being one of the funniest things while also still being dramatic. So it's an argument that I just wholeheartedly disagree with.
So when we're finished with this episode, or excuse me, with this season, I think we have talked about we're going to cover the new D&D movie. We should probably also cover I think 2000. It came out in 2000, the earlier D&D movie with Jeremy Irons, which from what I have seen, I have not seen the thing in its entirety. From what I recall, there's not a lot of intentional humor in that movie, but it is, as you said, it's a critical part of D&D. You need that additional humor because the things that you're talking about are otherwise so fantastic, in the sense of it is a fantasy show. Crazy things are happening. We in this episode, one of my observations is the Sphinx dies. This entity that is thousands of years old, hasn't seen its mate.
Older than time.
Yeah, it's this immensely powerful entity sacrifices itself to save Scanlan, a creature that it just met, that it recognized was worthy of something, and it fights this dragon, this pretty epic battle, and that's a dramatic moment. But it came in this episode of a bunch of other humor. If the entire thing had been dark and full of conflict, it would not be enjoyable to watch. So you have to have it. And one of the things that the live stream was great, because you have these incredible improv actors that are doing it, and they're really good at the humor. And now you have a show where they're going to put energy into it, so that in 30 minutes we're covering probably 2.5, 3 episodes, live stream episodes worth of content, and it's just as much balance between the humor and the drama. So yeah.
Well, and that's the thing, like D&D related content isn't House of the Dragon.
Yeah.
It's not Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon can have funny moments, but it's for the most part dramatic and not a whole lot of humor. Like in Game of Thrones, we get instances of Tyrion being funny, or
usually in the early seasons.
Yeah, interactions with some characters, but for the most part, it's entire drama. It's gory, but that's what makes D&D content so different, is that it's supposed to be funny mixed in with all of these other things as well. So if they were going to make a D&D movie that wasn't funny and it was just serious the whole time, it wouldn't feel like D&D. So if it's a D&D property, if it's based on a D&D property, you have to expect humor. And if you don't have humor, then to me, it's not D&D. When we sit down and have a game and have like a D&D session, there's like stupid funny shit that happens all the time.
Absolutely.
Like shoveling a pile of shit and slipping and falling in it, and like all this stuff. I'm excited to talk about the new movie because I heard it's funny, and that makes me very happy. Now, in terms of episode 6, I don't recall Scanlan losing Mythcarver in the live stream. Do you remember that?
No, and the whole intervention of Umbrasyl into this meeting with the Sphinx, all of that is purely
fabricated.
That's purely new for the show. Again, I like it. I like the, I won't say constant threat, but reintroducing the threat of the dragons. I like killing the Sphinx. It wasn't, I didn't take any joy in it, but it did heighten the stakes. And I think in the show, this Sphinx, the male Sphinx's lair is on the continent of Taldore, so on the other side of the ocean from the female Sphinx. I don't think we really got a sense of the geography of where they were in this episode. That's a quibble.
It just felt like Vasselheim still.
Yeah, it did. It felt like,
or whatever,
continuing north. of Vasselheim. But regardless, I don't think Scanlan lost Mythcarver in the show, but he also didn't really use it a whole lot, with maybe one notable exception, which was one of the times they were in the Nine Hells, when he basically single-handedly saved them using Mythcarver. But that happens down the road.
If we even get that in this show.
Yeah, I mean, that was to, I think they did that to get a vestige for Pike, the armor for Pike. I don't know if they're going to try to adapt that here.
I thought it was going into the Nine Hells to defeat the Rakshasa.
That was a different occasion.
I forgot they went to the Hells multiple times.
They had 2 trips to Hell. Yeah, because I think the trip to kill the Rakshasa, they also took, they didn't have Scanlan. That was Tarion.
That's right. Tarion Darrington.
Yeah. And anyway, that's all stuff that may or may not happen in the future of the show. The other thing that jumped out to me was at the end here during the plane shift. I don't recall them splitting up as they did, where you had Pike and Grog and Scanlan kind of fall off from the rest of the group. And the first thing that reminded me of was, I mentioned Thor earlier in this podcast, but the scene when Thor and Loki are escaping from Hela in Thor Ragnarok, where they kind of fall off of the Bifrost. And then I think they both end up landing on the Jeff Goldblum planet, but at different places. So we might have something like that, where they're all in the Fey realm, but they need to connect up first, and there's some adventures there. And obviously we need to deal with Grog stabbing Pike in the chest. But yeah, that was another thing that jumped out to me.
Now, one of your last notes is giving me rotoscoping vibes. If you want to talk about your last note that you wrote.
Sure. So this is something that I noticed in the first several episodes of the season. I think I know where it's coming from, but I am not a huge fan of the way that they are animating the Sphinxes and the dragons. And I think it's partially because those are very complicated figures that are moving a lot. And so it looks as if the Sphinxes and the dragons are more computer than hand-drawn. And if you look at Vox Machina, they look more hand-drawn. And I'm not saying that it's people literally with pen and paper. I think it's probably using the equivalent of a stylus on a tablet type thing. But I'm not a huge fan of it. I understand why they need to do it. It's just easier to get all of the moving parts using probably some sort of computer rendering. But the juxtaposition of the characters and then the environment, and then this differently animated figure of the Sphinx or the dragons, it clashes a little bit. So it's not a game-breaking part of the experience, but it does jump out to me.
And I don't have anything else to add for episode 6. Is there anything you want to add?
I'll say this.
Besides, I'll say having Grog stab Pike was peak of drama to end the episode on a cliffhanger.
Yeah. Of these 3 episodes, I thought I think I probably liked these more than the first 3 episodes in the season. I really liked the episode 4 and episode 5, just because of the way that they're tying in these things from childhood, and you get an emerging sense of the themes. I think maybe in this one, the connection between the Sphinx and Scanlan, that's going to pay off in later episodes when we have some of the things that Scanlan goes through and his struggle to be loved.
Oh yeah, that moment with the Sphinx was great.
Yeah, and the Sphinx is the tears running down the Sphinx's face when
Sphinx says,
Scanlan's finished.
With such a song, you must be so knowledgeable of love.
Yeah.
And that's when Scanlan says something along the lines of, I only know so much about love because I don't have it, and I'm trying to find it. So, the last few episodes have really revealed the struggle Scanlan's going through, even back to like the female Sphinx kind of talking to him. So yeah, I'm looking forward to just knowing where this season's going to end, because there's so much content for them to cover. It's knowing where the season ends is great, because then we know what they're going to skip or what they're going to cut out. So
do we know where it's going to end?
We don't.
Oh, we don't. Okay.
Well, at least I don't, but that's what I'm looking forward to seeing. So,
well, we have 4 dragons, and we're halfway through the season, and none of the dragons have been killed. So either things are going to pick up tremendously, or we're going to
get... they might, because we've already gotten the intro to Westron. We know Henry Winkler plays Pike's grandpa, right?
Will Hand.
So yeah, I mean, things are going to have to come to a head pretty quick if we're halfway through the season already.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I think we're probably going to get at least through the death of Umbrasyl. Because I have to, we know we're going to be in the Feywild for at least one episode, maybe more. We could end this. Well, I don't want to speculate too much, but I think we're probably going to at least go into another season with some of the dragon stuff unresolved, and then we'll pick up from there.
Yep, I'm with you.
All right. So with that, we have 3 more episodes of The Legend of Vox Machina Season 2 coming out this week. When you all hear this episode, we'll be very close to the release of those episodes. So we will be covering that in the next episode of this pod. And in the meantime, please like, share, subscribe this podcast. Go to our YouTube page. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, please like our videos on YouTube. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. It will help put those episodes in front of more eyes. If you have any desire to reach out, elsringsnerdythings@gmail.com, elsrings and nerdy things on our Facebook page. Sean, anything else we want to send out to our good listeners?
I'll just say that we've had a few subscribers already, and the subscriptions that we've had have already allowed us to invest in better editing software that I use for the videos. So there is a direct correlation between the subscription money that we've gotten and our ability to invest in technology that will make the show better. So thank you to those who have already subscribed, and thank you to any future subscribers for helping us out. So
indeed,
that's it for me. Thank you, and we'll see you next week.
Bye, everybody.